get started. And it was a beautiful day today. And I do have a fun announcement. I just got an email with some pictures. I'll forward it to the city council members. It has pictures of our gateway monument signs.
Ooh.
They're in the state of Colorado.
Are you saying they're real?
Oh.
They're really
And
happening?
they are real and they look good.
Elvis
I'll
is
believe
there.
it when I see it.
They're sitting at the border.
I just know there's somewhere in the state they've arrived and they have to pour the concrete and that's going to take a couple weeks. And then, but yeah, so I'll forward you the pictures so you all can see them too.
I think I
So.
prefer not to see them until they're here.
Oh, yeah? I'm just glad they're real and it might
They have mold on
happen.
them? They didn't have any moss or mold on them?
No. Yeah, they're meant to, survive the elements forever.
Good, because I hope we never have to go through that process
I know.
again.
Almost in time for our terms to come to, for some of us, for our terms to come to an end. We do want to welcome our guests here today, and I believe we are starting with the Department of Wildlife. Is that right? I think you're first on our agenda. Am I really? Yeah,
Oh,
so
we have to-
please
can we
come
take roll?
on up
We do roll.
after our roll call. And then we're really actually anxious to hear about the wildlife update and how the urban hunting has been going. So roll call, please.
Councilmember Cochran? Here. Councilmember Gonzalez? Absent. Councilmember Hamrick?
Here.
Councilmember Jaquez? Absent. Councilmember Meisner?
Here.
Councilmember Turner? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
Here.
Mayor Troutman? Absent.
All right, Officer Holder, come on up.
What button do I push up here? Or is the
Don't
microphone
push
on?
any of our
They're already
buttons.
hot for you, guys.
Don't
Yeah,
push
the
my
lights are
buttons.
just, red means you have to stop.
If that thing turns red, look.
I thought it was the other way around. Okay. Well, guys, thank you very much for having me here today to talk to you. For those that don't know me, my name is Zach Holder. I'm a district wildlife manager with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I've been asked to come and talk a little bit about the urban deer hunt that we had, or what people call the Canyon City deer hunt, and kind of tell you a little bit about what went on, what we saw, some of the successes and things like that. And so we'll do that. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll do the best I can to answer them. Some of them I might not be able to answer just because of the time of year and that kind of stuff. But as you guys know, with your support, we offered some additional licenses, hunting licenses, for the harvest of does, female deer here in Canyon City within a certain geographical area that we outlined with your guidance, and then with my partner Bob Croce and I's input on that stuff to kind of outline where we're having the most deer problems within the city limits and part of the county. And I think we came up with a pretty good area there that addresses the majority of the kind of in-town or urban problems that we've had. Some of the things that we discussed when we were developing this season is that we were worried about, number one, the safety aspect of things. We don't want to do anything dangerous, right? That's our number one goal. We were wanting to make sure that we did things that were going to be humane and right for the animals as well. That was another top goal there. And we were really trying to just do something to control the population, if you will, that in my book, or in my estimation, is much more than what we need here in town. It's grown to a population standpoint that harvest was certainly something that we needed to do. So when we set our license numbers last April, we included 55 licenses. Those 55 licenses were specific to does only. And they were specific to the geographical area that we outlined and we decided on as a group there. Of those 55 licenses, guys, we do not have the harvest numbers yet. That's something that we're working on right now. For those hunters that are in the audience or that might be listening, you know that you're getting calls from a survey company that is asking if you were successful and that kind of stuff. So at a later date, I'll be able to provide you with a real concrete harvest statistic on that. The most important thing here that I want to mention to you guys is that we did not have a single call as it relates to hunting during that specific season or the Canyon City in-town deer hunt. We did not have a single call or issue with that. No law enforcement issues from the standpoint of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys didn't have anything either, did you? Okay, great. So I can tell you that I'm certain that there was harvest on these animals. I know that people were out using those licenses, and I didn't get a call from anybody that was concerned about the way they were doing it, and whether they were doing it in a safe or unsafe manner. Nothing like that. We didn't have any wounded animals running around with arrows in them, nothing. So that's a pretty successful deal there. So, you know, as we move forward here and we look into next year, I think from a professional standpoint, and I've talked to my partner Bob Croce about this, I think that we should continue with this and quite honestly look to increase the number of licenses that we're going to put into that season. We're not going to get to a point, guys, where we overwhelm the small area here, or that we put so many hunters out there that it's going to create an unsafe environment. But I certainly think that we are at a population point that we could really benefit from this season going forward and an increase in licenses.
Okay, we have a question from Councilmember Meisner.
It's not really necessarily a question. Well, I do. Of the 55 licenses, were those all sold?
Yes, sir. Yep, the 55 licenses were all sold. If I remember correctly, those were all first choice licenses. So people put those in as a first choice. That's what they wanted to draw, and they all went, which is good. I mean, that means if you're applying for that with your first choice, those hunters are probably going to go out and utilize that license, and we're going to get the harvest that we need.
Yeah, and I don't know, I was just under the assumption when we started this that it was, even though we were going to look at a trial, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm certainly interested from my council position to continue this. And I think I'm not in the animal management business. That's your business.
Yes, sir.
In terms of where those numbers need to be. So, you know, I think if DOW is telling us that we need to continue to program from a management standpoint, then I'm personally in favor of it.
Councilmember Hamrick.
Thank you. So do you have any anecdotal stories? I mean, we've heard prior to, where we are now, we've heard from different private landowners, some of the orchard owners here in town, concerned about deer damage. I'm sure that they were able to get together with some of the successful licensees. Permittees. Do you have any anecdotal stories or any sense of how the hunt went? Or
I do. I think a few people that I know of utilized the license, utilized it in areas where we were having game damage. And when I say game damage, I am talking about game damage in the terms of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and that's damage to growing crops, whether it's alfalfa, pumpkins, corn, those types of things. So when we talk about game damage here, it's not going to be your ornamental trees unless you're in a nursery type situation or something like that. Right. But one of the hunts that I know of was they were targeting deer on a place that was having game damage. They were eating their alfalfa, and the lady that let the hunter in was very pleased with getting a harvest, number one, and number two, that increase in human activity in there, we're keeping the deer out of our fields, and so that is a success story here. As far as what it will do for the overall general population, 55 licenses, I'm not sure that that's going to have any impact at all on the population. But what it does show is that we can be very successful in doing this urban deer hunt in a safe and effective manner.
Any other questions from council? I had a couple questions. How long was the season for?
The season was 2 months.
And what are the problem areas that were specified for
Oh.
licenses?
You know, really the whole interior of the boundary line that we drew out is a problem area. The real problem areas that we're seeing are places like Sonny Smaller's Orchard, you know, Carol Fontana's place where the old DeWeese Lodge was, the Madones where they have their pumpkins, the pumpkin patch, and those types of places. But even right down, I live on Barrett Avenue, and there's 20 to 30 deer on my street on any given day. Anywhere where there's a little alfalfa field or a little apple orchard, which is pretty much the entire Canyon City community, you're going to see those deer. And I can tell you that I have had to put down an increased number of deer this year than in the past. And when I say I have to put them down, it's because of whether it's an accident involving a vehicle, deer getting hung up in a fence. We've had some unfortunate incidents at the Robeson Mansion with that fence that we won't go into much detail about, but I'm seeing.
We've all seen it.
Yeah. So I've seen an increase in some of that stuff on the amount of animals that we've had to put down, and what that says to me as a wildlife professional is that we've got more deer and they're getting into these situations because of an increased population. I don't want to say an overpopulation because making a comment like overpopulation requires sound biological data. You know, we'd have to go out and survey and find out exactly what we've got. But just the old eye test tells me that we've got a lot of deer. And Mr. Denny sitting back there will attest to that.
Mm-hmm. How many years do you think it will take to get our urban herd to a healthy population?
It's pure speculation on my part, 3 to 5.
And how many licenses do you estimate we might need to increase to for 2020?
You know, I would like to not answer that right now just because I want to see, number one, what our harvest was, what success we've had there. Number two, if we want to continue with this hunt and it's something that we want to really concentrate on lowering this population, I think it would behoove us to do a real solid population estimate on that deal before we can say, well, we've got to kill 200 deer or whatever. I don't want to say right now how many licenses it would take without doing our due diligence to count the deer and that kind of stuff.
And how do you do a solid count?
Just go out and count, basically. I mean, when we do our deer and elk counts out in the wild places, whether it's Oak Creek Grade or Highway 9 or something like that, we do it with the Hughes 500 helicopter.
Right.
But that's a little difficult here in town. So would it just be boots on the ground? It'd be me, my partners. We would just go out and kind of grid it off and start counting deer. We'd count 30 in this field, 30 in this field, and we'd get a population estimate based on that.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, thank you, and thank to your partner and to your department for working with us, because I think this is, hopefully maybe this can be a success story for Colorado,
Well, I want to thank you guys for having the foresight and the fortitude to implement something like this. And I think you're right. I think this is going to be something that other communities like ours are going to look at as a kind of a boilerplate of how to do things, and hopefully this will be something that will go a long way to kind of controlling these urban deer populations. One thing that I want to add is and I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but in the whole southeast region, we are testing, or we did test, all deer that were killed with a rifle during the regular rifle seasons for chronic wasting disease. It's a disease that these deer get. It's encephalitis. It's caused by a prion and a lot of things that are a lot harder for me to pronounce than it is some of the scientists that study it, obviously. But that's something that we're testing in the southeast region. And certainly when those tests comes back, depending on what level of chronic wasting disease we have, that will also have ramifications on how we control mule deer populations in the state. So just something to add to that. We don't know any results yet. That stuff is just kind of tapering in or coming in now as we go, but we will have more information on that, I'm sure, down the line.
Councilmember Meisner?
Just on a side note, she's not a hunter, so she doesn't understand the reluctance of DOW to give us harvest projections ahead of time.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's something that we really try to give the most accurate population estimates that we can, because what you never want to do is overestimate. You know what I mean? You never want to overestimate on that stuff. So we will, if we make the concerted effort here to go forward with this and increase licenses, we will do the best that we can and provide you guys with sound biological numbers and go that route.
You ever seen when they select a pope? It's kind of like that. That's how they, that's how
It's
secret
a
it is.
spiritual experience?
It's very
Well,
secret.
I don't know I've never been to those meetings, so I don't know.
Got it.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith, to do a good count, the WAG's comment on that is you count the hooves and divide by 4.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
That's a lot of math.
Absolutely. I need a calculator to do it. Oh, and one other point of note, Tilde is doing fine. Nobody got anywhere near it. Tilde is going to be his own worst enemy because he's now out looking for girlfriends, and he's crossed Highway 50 several times, and so on and so forth. But as far as a hunting standpoint, Tilde is fine. Nobody did anything to him. It just, hopefully he can look both ways before he crosses the road. That's what I'm most concerned about for him right now.
All right, excellent. So we really appreciate the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me here. And anything you need, please give me a call. We'll discuss it. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have the Park Ranger Program with Chief Harvey, and it looks like Rex Brady's here as well. And can you remind me your first name again?
Jesse.
Jesse, I knew that. Appreciate you guys being here as well. And we're here particularly because of our worry and concern about activities at our public parks. And possibly this could be a solution. So go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smith and members of council. So I know we've kind of brought this concept up once before in front of you, and really wanted to go into greater depth as far as why we're looking at this particular program and what we think it will actually help us solve. There's been a lot of complaints about certain parks and different problems that are coming up in those certain parks, but I think it's also important to remember that Park Ranger program would not be specifically for 1 or 2 parks or 1 or 2 issues. And so what we're really hoping to do tonight is to talk a little bit more, not only about the concerns that I'm sure you all have heard that we have been getting complaints about. Those are important to address, but there are other issues too that the parks are facing. You know, and unfortunately, as busy as we're getting, I just don't think we have, this would be a much better way to manage some of those issues, and quite honestly, would help us kind of elevate some of the visits that the parks get, because we have additional bodies that are going to be out visible, making contact, doing community outreach. And so kind of along those same lines, and to give you a greater depth of what Park Ranger programs are doing around the state and what different communities are using them for, I drafted this. You all should have a copy of this to take with you. I didn't make enough for the audience, but I know there's some folks that want to speak on this as well, and we'll make copies of that for anybody that's actually in the public. So,
Just a quick pause. If we're having anyone who wants to speak from the audience, can you please fill out a form with your name on it? And then we'll give it up to Cindy right up here. So we need
George, are you talking tonight?
Yeah, I
would-
think you should.
I think you should.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the presentation, and then we'll go to the audience comments.
We won't tell anybody that.
This sounds like your students sometimes.
That's where I was going.
So, as we do this presentation, I'm kind of going to go through it, but I also would like Jesse and Rex from the Parks Department, they have some input on these different parks and can maybe provide kind of how we envision this program working between the Parks Department and the Police Department, because it definitely would be a partnership between the two of us. And with that being said, there's some things here just to understand the different roles of what a park ranger would do that would not be supplanting or replacing functions the Parks Department is already doing. What it really is doing is adding a function that the Parks Department needs from an enforcement aspect to make sure that individuals that are violating different parts of park regulations or causing damage or causing other issues that we'll go through in just a minute, that it augments the efforts of the Parks Department to keep our parks beautiful, and then obviously develop those. And so this kind of lays it out there that the Parks Department is still going to be the ones that will be responsible for creating those, maintaining those, doing the annual maintenance, kind of doing the strategic planning, if you will, to identify where we need to go as far as trails or how we develop those different parks, actually managing the operations of those parks. So the Park Ranger program would not take over any of those functions. Rex, do you want to mention a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, with this program and working with the chief, it adds that enforcement element that we are lacking. For example, we go to a mountain park, Red Canyon Park, for instance. We find, and we do this quite often, actually,
Is your mic on?
it's green.
Okay.
There it is. Okay. It's brighter green now. But for instance, we'll go to, and this has happened, Jesse is the guy with the boots on the ground normally in those areas, but we go to, like I say, for an example, we go to Red Canyon Park. There's, there's pictures in here that kind of show that, but we have one or more individuals that have been there, obviously, for more than 3 days. 72 hours is the limit that we enforce. They'll be there for weeks. All we can do really is, as a Parks Department, walk up with our notice that says you have exceeded your stay and you need to leave. We can hand that to them, and that's about as far as we can go. If they refuse to leave, then we have to get law enforcement involved. We're not trained to handle that type of situation. You walk into those situations, you have no idea what could happen. We've seen knives, we've seen guns, we've seen this and that and the other. So that enforcement element, I think, is going to go a long, long way in reducing some of these problems that we see. Vandalism, same way. They know when the Parks Department gets off at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. So they don't do any of that type of stuff during those hours. So this is another area that could help. Like I say, I think the enforcement issue and that threat of enforcement is going to go a long way in solving a lot of our problems in all of our parks.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
Bright green.
Bright green. And a lot of the staff that we have that are in the trenches, they're seasonal employees. Majority of my seasonals this summer were high school to college transition kids. And the city-issued flip phones don't have good cameras, texting capabilities. And I train them. If you go to, and we'll bring Red Canyon up, we could bring a lot of these different properties up, but you have an 18 or a 19-year-old kid that shows up on 15 to 20 individuals that definitely look very suspicious. first off, you don't have cell service in certain spots in these mountain parks. Manpowered provided, we try to send 2 individuals up there at any given time. And even then, 2 individuals might not be enough. I don't expect these guys to go approach and enforce some of these situations that we come across. I've broken up some certain things where it's me walking into 20 individuals, you know, and I'm 40 years old, not 20 years old, and I'm still a little bit hesitant. As far as photos to do justice, I've talked to my staff that, you know, when you're in a really kind of sensitive situation, the last thing you want to do is walk into suspected anything, holding your phone out at these individuals, taking photos of their faces when you don't have service. By the time we get back to service and we activate emergency services, a lot of times they have that time period to get their stuff and hopefully move out. Which comes back to us being maintenance. It takes, you know, man-hours to clean up everything that gets left behind. You know, just the mountain parks alone, we've got 55 trash cans that need emptied daily to minimally every other day to weekly. All in all, the Parks Department, if you add it up, we've got like 115 trash cans that are on the daily maintenance, and that's not the stuff that they throw to the side. We're, you know, challenged with the maintenance portion, but I just as a staff member don't know what to tell certain individuals when you come across certain situations, and it's not about 1 or 2 parks. You know, it's about when you get to the hogbacks and there's 10 or 15 people. I think Rex came across an instance on Skyline Drive this afternoon. I was turning Christmas on for him to proof it this morning, and there was definitely suspicious activity going on up there, which equated to me to send staff to go up there and do graffiti removal. That's what we do. That's the maintenance aspect, but we don't have any ammunition, especially for junior staff that has not been around for a while, to walk up and say, this is a city ordinance and you cannot do this. They don't have it. They're getting walked on, laughed at, and they come to me for answers, and I don't have them.
Yeah, and a lot of our younger staff, even full-time staff that are younger, on some of these instances, they're intimidated. You know, they don't want to get into something that they can't get themselves out of.
Yep.
So we see that quite often, and especially with our seasonal employees. They walk into a situation that's kind of sketchy. They don't know how to deal with that. And we tell them, if you feel threatened or uncomfortable, just back out, leave, come and tell us. We'll you know, take the proper steps from that point.
So I do have a question, Chief Harvey. If our park ranger were to come upon a camping situation and there was some suspicious behavior or vandalism or whatever, what would the park ranger do?
So the first thing that they would obviously do is try and make contact, the same way our co-responder program makes contact with folks that are camping in places throughout the city currently. So the biggest issue with the parks is their distance from the rest of the main police force. So the reason why we're looking at potentially two, and just to be clear, tonight's meeting and this plan, if you will, is more or less just philosophical. There are definitely some things that we still need to work out as far as the funding concerns, full-time or part-time. We really just wanted to kind of let you know what we're thinking, what we're seeing, and how we're thinking about responding to that. So typically what would happen is if we come across a group of about 15 people and we're by ourselves, and we think we have to take an enforcement action, we would call for another officer to come help. I would not expect any officer to go up against 15 individuals on their own. But one of the things that we do when we come across that is we evaluate the group as well. So, 15 people could be a hostile group. It could be a very friendly group. It could just be a number of different things. And so we have to look at what the group is and kind of what that dynamic is and make a judgment call for our own safety and then we would actually make contact at that point. So generally, it's a contact officer and a cover officer. Contact officer would be the person who's talking to the group. The cover officer is standing back and more or less providing security of the overall scene.
And what kind of enforcement do you have if there is illegal activity?
So it depends on what it is. Suspicious activity, and actually we're going to go through some of the calls a little bit later on. Those are pretty common calls that we get in parks, and it doesn't always equate to criminal activity. And so, the most important part is that we respect, obviously, individuals' rights to be able to congregate in an area, and just because it looks suspicious to one person doesn't necessarily equate to a crime. So we would, when we come across something that's suspicious in nature, is we would investigate that and find out, actually why they're there. And that generally leads to a conversation of, well, yeah, they've been there for 2 weeks, and it is a camping area, or it's not a camping area. They don't have a permit. They're in an area that requires a permit, but they didn't actually get that. And so there's a conversation there that could lead to an education. It could lead to they've been there for months and have been told several times that they are not allowed to be there. Could lead to a citation. It could lead to an individual's armed and not allowed to be and gets arrested. So, I mean, there's a myriad of different things that they could run across. But to answer your question, it's not as simple as saying, okay, they're suspicious, and so there's obviously criminal activity afoot. It requires further investigation. And I think that's part of the other reason why it's a good partnership. The same way that code enforcement is a good partnership in the police department with planning and zoning and the city clerk's office and those other arms, administrative arms of the city. The police department is a good partner there to say, okay, let's figure out, get that objective viewpoint about what actually is happening here. And if it's criminal in nature or if it's a violation of a civil code, then we obviously do an investigation that we present to the court and try and address it that way, either through municipal or county court, whichever is more appropriate.
All right, thank you.
And if I may add a little bit to that, one of my major fears, and I know it's Jesse's too, and we've responded to these many, many, many times, especially in the mountain parks. Unattended campfires. People will be there camping, they'll leave their campfire burning, and we all know what happened in the Royal Gorge Park. And that's one of my biggest fears, is somebody leaves a campfire burning, the wind comes up, and we lose another park. I don't know how many times we've gotten calls from people and even just drove up on unattended campfires burning. So that, in and of itself, I think is something we really need to look at and have a presence there more than what we are able to do. We try to get to our mountain parks, especially in the summertime, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Just with staff levels, that's about all we can do. If there's events or we know that there's going to be, more than the normal amount of people camping, we'll try to send somebody up almost every day just to check on those kind of things. But, after 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, our staff is off, and so we're not able to check those types of situations until the next morning. So, and it's a major concern of mine.
Okay, Councilmember Meisner.
So, when you were in the Bahamas or wherever you were in the bathing in the sun, I think your cohort presented this to us, and we grilled him. That's why we're back. But I think council's concern was this enforcement that we get into with a non-post certified individual and the potential risk. Generally, I'm at least in favor of the concept of the program. I think you need to gather some numbers between all of you to show, or to at least maybe justify how we're going to reduce the regular post staff calls so that we can see the cost savings there. But I just get really concerned about those individuals being in remote areas, not being armed, and being in a potential, for the most part, a conflicting situation. I mean, those people, most of those people realize they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. And somebody's going to have to tell them to hightail it. And we know how that can get to be conflicting really quickly.
So as we go through, and that's part of what I'm hoping to answer tonight, is some of the questions that you guys had at the last council meeting where this was initially proposed, is to be able to kind of answer and give you some background information about what the construction of it technically would be. And then, depending upon, obviously, your comments tonight and questions and desires, obviously, we would bring back a more concrete proposal that may answer some of those things. But I think some of those things, this presentation will answer some of those, or at least guide us to a more concrete direction.
I think, was everybody here for the last one? Anyways, I think one of the concerns was that we've got a ranger doing an initial response with the intention of reducing the load on regular officers. But that ranger really has limited capabilities, and particularly if there's going to be enforcement, he's going to have to call for an officer anyways. And I think there was some question there in terms of what are we really accomplishing by sending out a ranger, investigating, and then calling in an officer to actually take some action. And
So let me get through it, and I think, because I answer that more towards the end of the presentation here, and then that might help kind of guide those or alleviate some of those fears that you have.
All right,
So
so let's
that'd be okay.
proceed on the presentation, please.
all right.
So just as kind of an overview, these are the majority of the parks. These are not the only parks, and just to kind of give you an example, because at least the impression I've gotten is that there are about 3 parks really that are taking the majority of focus from the community. The Parks Department has a much wider scope of responsibility, and so the vision for this program would be not just those issues that are most in the public's eye at this moment, but any issues that are across all of our different parks. And to give you a good example, Red Canyon, Temple Canyon, and the Royal Gorge Park is right around 6,200 acres. So, and those are 3 of those that are listed here. So it's a large issue, and this would not be specific to just 1 or 2 parks that the police department typically responds to. One of the reasons why these outerlying parks don't get the same level of attention is because they are far. And so, if it takes half an hour to get there, deal with the issue, and half an hour to get back, then that pulls that individual, that police officer, out of the call rotation, and obviously calls start stacking up and the other officers have to pull that weight. So the concept with this is that it would provide greater visibility in parks that aren't getting that currently because they're not getting calls. It doesn't mean there's not issues there. It just means that we're not detecting those or somebody's not calling about them. They may see it and just pass it along. But it absolutely is something that visitors to these different parks would obviously come across.
Quick question, what about the Arkansas River Walk? Because I've had a number of citizens contact me about being fearful and approached by individuals on the River Walk that have been really uncomfortable and frightening.
So I probably should have reordered this because this was the majority of parks that were having those issues, but this is not the only area. There's actually 22 miles of single-track trail that I'm sure you're all aware of. There are open spaces, there are green belts, and I list those later on. The River Walk is one of those. We also have the cemetery where we have some issues. So it's a pretty large scope, and these are kind of the focus where we have the majority of our complaints or our calls, but it's not the only one. And absolutely, the River Walk would be part of this.
Okay, thank you.
Which is now locked, right?
The River Walk? No, Eagle Trailhead is locked due to vandalism
Okay.
and noise and other problems, but that's just the Eagle Wing Trailhead.
So how we kind of broke this down is that instead of going through each individual park is we tried to kind of group them together, and I'm going to rely on Jesse and Rex to help me out with this, but we wanted to not only show some of the concerns that are happening in these parks, but also look on the other side of this too, that how it could increase the, oh Lord, what's the word I'm looking for? The experience, increase the experience of people who are actually visiting the park through some benefits. And so, with Red Canyon, Temple Canyon, Royal Gorge, and the Hogbacks and other open space that we manage, some of the concerns or issues that we're coming across is trail damage, natural and man-made fire issues, whether it's from campfires or other, lightning strikes or combustion issues, camping violations, environmental damage that, this is something that we really should pay closer attention to preserve our parks, whether it's knocking over a rock face monument or vandalism on some sort of other iconic area, or just simply throwing things on the ground. But on the other side of this, a park ranger who's going through these areas and seeing where people are congregating can then give that information back to the Parks Department and saying, hey, look, we came across 20 individuals that were backpacking or, trying to bike. They were causing some damage off the single track trail, but this area seems to be a pretty popular area to where we're doing enforcement, but it might be useful for us to actually construct some single track in that area because there's significant public interest. In 6,200 acres, we could have issues and have on at least one or two occasions I'm aware of where we need to go out and find somebody that got lost or hurt and is in need of assistance. So search and rescue would be part of that. And also allow, our police officers have AEDs and they're trained in CPR and first aid, but that would actually be one of the main functions of this group as well. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later on why, because some of the other programs, how they have developed their park ranger program, it provides that extra level of service from the city, assisting in wildfire detection and mitigation efforts. So I know there were some cuts a while back, actually to the Parks Department that made it more difficult for us to do some of that mitigation as it relates to wildfire. And this group would also coordinate with BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the National Forest Service for issues that they are having, and then obviously be a pipeline for greater communication with those agencies. But Rex, I know you know more about the wildfire mitigation efforts that we used to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in the past, we used inmate labor. It's been quite some time since we've had those. Actually, it was prior to 2013 when the forestry department was cut. But we did at times get a few grants for wildfire mitigation. We just went through, ironically, the Royal Gorge Park about 2 years before it burned. But, the winds were such that it didn't matter what type of mitigation was performed, it was going up. And Red Canyon, Temple Canyon are the same way now. They could really benefit from some mitigation by simply removing the dead trees and some of the dead fuels on the ground. And that can be accomplished in several different ways. Selling firewood permits, which we haven't done in some time, which it's probably time to consider that as well, to get rid of some of that fuel. Obviously writing grants or getting, our inmate labor program, if we get that off the ground like I hoped it would, we can use those individuals to do that mitigation as well. So, yeah, wildfire mitigation, it's near and dear to my heart after what we went through with the Royal Gorge Park.
Okay, we have Councilmember Turner.
We've just passed an ordinance allowing us to sentence people in municipal court to useful public service. Is this an area where you could use that volunteerism in the parks?
It's a possibility. The drawback there is normally the type of equipment we're using for wildfire mitigation, chainsaws. They would have to be certified with the chainsaw.
Give them a handsaw.
Or handsaw, there you go. You don't get much work done a lot of times, but yeah, absolutely. In part, they could be drag and brush,
Right.
or we could actually, certify them on a chainsaw, which takes, just an hour or so.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, give them all the proper BE equipment to do that. But, I'm really, really hoping that this inmate program with the federal prison blossoms and develops, and we can use those individuals for this type of work.
Okay.
But there certainly are other avenues.
Well, if I could just add to that, not even just the wildfire mitigation, because, Parks Department member working the saw or whatever we need from a liability standpoint, they could function as laborers. The same thing could be said for areas where we have significant amount of litter, that they could actually help clean that up as well. And any vandalism from spray paint, those types of things can help as well. So absolutely, that could be a function of this program.
Yeah. fire mitigation is far from the only public service that they could use them for, so.
Clean up that mess there.
A lot of,
Jesse, did you have a comment?
Mayor Pro Tem, just a couple. A lot of the problems that I have, other than, you know, unattended campfires and parties in which campfires are 20 feet high when there's fire bans, I have a problem with the inorganics. When you show up to some of these leftover campsites that are outside of established camping areas that we were lucky to find. And Chief said we've got over 6,000 acres of mountain parks, and we go to our normal public places, public bathrooms, and time permitting, we'll go down the homemade roads. And you go down a homemade road back a mile, and you've been burning paint, you've been burning couches, you've been burning just bad pollutants, inorganic stuff that, you know, should not be burned. That's my big problem.
Okay. Right, back to you, Chief.
So I think Centennial Vets Park and Depot Park are ones that we're hearing quite a bit at the police department. I'm sure many of you are. I know the Parks Department is as well. So we have some of the same concerns there. There's unlawful camping. We actually are having some damage to city structures, whether it's bathroom doors being torn off, electrical outlets being damaged. We are actually having disturbances and assaults in those parks, drug use and littering, and it is having an effect on the community that they are afraid to go in there. I heard a story this week that there are people who used to go eat lunch in Vets Park that now are actually parking on streets near City Hall to eat their lunch instead of actually going into Vets Park. And so, you know, one of the benefits of having this program is that increased kind of presence. And we have started doing crime prevention security assessments. But I think having an ability for an individual who is going to follow through from an enforcement side on what that security assessment says, it's not just, you know, removing brush or adding lighting, but actually being present to address what some of those issues are, I think will have a significant impact. The other piece with that is that when we have presence, we also have community interaction. And so just like the police can change the tone or tenure of an area, when we're contacting someone and how we contact them and how that contact goes, that leaves a lasting impression for individuals who we come into contact with. And so I think there's an opportunity for that to kind of raise awareness with some of the issues that we're having in these different parks, but to have that positive presence, you know, when there is that fear of crime, and have a conversation with somebody. And whether it's somebody who's just visiting the park or somebody that we have to take enforcement action against, you know, that can also kind of leave a lasting impression too, because the overall goal with this is not to send more cases to county court or municipal court, it's to change behavior. And so if that can be done through education or a citation or even a written warning, that's what the goal would be.
So Chief Harvey, at Veterans Park, we have problems with, as Rex has told me about a number of folks who will just spend the day in the bathrooms first thing in the morning when they, and spend all their time in there. And that there's vandalism in there too, and that there's fear of retaliation if we close the bathrooms early, or, you know, if they can't use it right, we thought maybe just lock them up, but then there's retaliation. What do we do about that?
So again, that kind of goes back to changing behavior. And so we've tried to do a couple of different things, whether it's turning the power off or changing the water start times, opening the bathrooms at different times. And really what we're doing is we're changing the maze, more or less, that people who want to go there and cause problems and damage things, they just have to go a different way to do the exact same thing. So we need to change that underlying behavior. And those are definitely methods that we can use, but there's got to be the follow-up on the enforcement on the other side of that. We change the bathroom start times. Well, that's where the park ranger program would come in, that we have this conversation that, you know, after hours, people are going in there, they're using drugs or whatever the complaint may be, that we change that to make it more lit, or we change the time so it's more during the day. The park ranger program then follows up to make sure that that behavior actually changes. And that's why I said it might be enforcement, it might be a conversation, but if we change the structure but don't change the behavior of the individuals who are causing the problem continues. Not that we don't need to change the procedures or the structure, because in many cases that will solve a lot of problems. But just changing that without having another mechanism to reinforce the behavioral change is why we're getting that retribution, if you will, from people who are upset that they're not able to go in the bathroom anymore at the time that they did, or, you know, get out of the cold at the time that they were, or whatever the case may be.
Okay. And just a quick note, if we're talking about, because they're probably in the bathrooms because it has been. Have had a lot of cold days. We did just have a meeting today with the Homeless Coalition and the fire chief staff in the in Loaves and Fishes, and we're looking at expanding opportunity to have more beds at night and how we can accommodate that under emergency situation, you know, during the winter months. And also the Mountain View Church is looking, that's just across the street from Loaves and Fishes, is looking at opening up a day center or a warming station. And so we are trying to find more opportunities that for positive places to go that are appropriate for, and most of those do have to go through a vetting system though to show their license, make sure they don't, comply with the rules. And most of those have those opportunities to be in, folks have to be in there, but I'm worried about some of those who are belligerent, who aren't allowed to go into the warming stations or Loaves and Fishes, and they're the ones that education might not be enough for change of behavior.
Absolutely, and I want to point out that it doesn't matter what group you look at. There are always people who don't want to follow the rules, who have a different agenda, that their behavior will not change. And so that's why there's a tiered system in the criminal justice system anyway, is because, I got in trouble when I was a kid, and I got talked to. They called my parents, and I got turned over, and I didn't do it anymore. Not everybody's in that same circumstance. Some people actually have to have more intense supervision or scrutiny, and so it doesn't matter what group you're looking at, there's always going to be those people. I also want to remind folks that there are also, in those same groups, there are a lot of good people too. And so one of the reasons why I listed this as access point to additional services outside of city functions is because currently we do that with the co-responder program, and so that's one way that if somebody needs a warming station or shelter or needs some additional services, whether it's substance use or a place to wash clothes or whatever the case that is that they need, this is also an additional mechanism for in these areas where we have people with social needs that they have another access point to hear about those and potentially get connected with them. So, it's a little bit of a different flair than some of the other communities that implement these, but absolutely this is a way to help folks that are experiencing some issues like needing a warm place to sleep. So these are some of the pictures. I couldn't put them all in there. There's a lot, but we wanted you to at least kind of get an idea of some of the things that the Parks Department is looking at, whether it's somebody sleeping in the bathroom or staying in there to get warm, putting their bike in there. There are other pictures inside of the bathroom that a little more graphic of things that are happening right near a restroom facility, but yet it's still occurring on the ground. And so there are some things there that, again, behavioral changes that need to occur. And for those individuals, services may not be appropriate, enforcement might be. And that's part of the other reason why it's a partnership with the Parks Department, because they're doing a good job of trying to connect people where they need to go. But that element that's missing is that enforcement piece for individuals who just do not want to follow the rules. Riverwalk, Mountain View, and Rudd Park, there are some different, and these all kind of have a different flair, which is why we group them differently. Riverwalk, we do have some unlawful camping. There are river safety concerns. And so this will kind of lead to some of the functions that I envision the park rangers doing, which is swift water rescue. The ambulance service and fire department currently does those. But having an active presence inside if somebody were to fall into the river or intentionally get into the river at a dangerous time, having someone that's trained and capable and knows when to get in the water, when not to, and how to actually rescue that individual would be important. We have littering, underage substance use, prohibited vehicle activity. What I mean by that is in certain parks, and I believe it's Mountain View, right?
Mountain View, Centennial, Mountain View and Centennial are the two main culprits. We have
So when it snows or there's rain, individuals like to take their vehicles, full-size vehicles, 4x4s, and actually drive on the grass and spin up mud and that kind of a thing. So there's all types of different damage that's happening in the parks. And so we just really need that change in behavior and a presence that somebody knows that, hey, if this happens here, a park ranger could be right around the corner or will be following up to specifically address what some of these issues are. This is some of the litter that we're finding. That's pretty significant. And so, Councilmember Turner, this is exactly what I meant by there is absolutely some use for individuals who, through municipal court, are sentenced to some sort of public service, that we can take them down and actually have work crews to help beautify this area, remove some of the underbrush that's there, and then obviously all the trash that's there too, to enhance the experience of people who are going to visit it afterwards.
I think, I also wanted to point out, Rex, that you gave me some estimates that the Parks Department probably spends about over $18,000 a year just in man hours for cleaning up. And
That's correct.
That's an example of.
I estimate this one in particular, it was right over here by John Nichols Crossing. And it was out of the way, so it wasn't visible from the bridge. We just happened, actually, a patron of the Riverwalk discovered it and called me. And when we walked into this situation, it's unbelievable. I mean, the picture doesn't do it justice. In all actuality, when I saw it, I said, nobody goes in there. Everybody back out of here. We're going to get a backhoe with a thumb. Everybody's going to be gloved up. Everybody's going to have respirators. Everybody's going to have full protection going in there. That's how bad that was. It was scary. And Jesse was the main guy, and Jesse's been on duty since 5 o'clock this morning as well. But yeah, that one in particular was very nasty, but we're running, into that type of situation quite often.
So in Macon Plaza, Museum, and the Red House and the library, they all have a little bit of a different flair as well. We do have some unlawful camping in the archways, actually, of the library. We have found evidence of someone needing a restroom. We have found people sleeping in those archways. There has been destruction of some of the electrical outlets that are there, moving some of the park benches. There have actually been campfires in these areas, very near to structures, which are obviously safety concerns. And by no means am I suggesting that a park ranger program is going to be a panacea that is going to solve all these issues unless you give me 10 people to do it. But it at least takes a step in the right direction to hopefully help identify that smaller group of individuals that are causing the majority of these problems, and then providing assistance to folks who aren't causing these problems or just positive contact. Once we get those individuals identified who are actually causing the majority of these issues, then hopefully that's where that enforcement piece will come into play and change that behavior.
Yeah, and I think we heard yesterday too that there's families with children around, and someone started throwing a hatchet at trees, and that was pretty dangerous.
Yes, that type of, well, just today, the contractors are starting the bridge lighting project. There's bollards on each end of the bridge, so vehicles can't drive onto the bridge. There is an individual with a machete that walks around in this area. He had actually taken his machete and chopped the metal where you put the key into the bollard to unlock it, to lift it out of the ground, and destroyed that mechanism. So we had to grind and grind and grind and grind to get the mechanism to open up so they could get the contractors onto the bridge. And, picnic tables, trees, whatever, they're hitting it all, so.
And that goes back to when my guys see it, by the time they call me and say, hey, I'm over here at River Station Park, and there's a kid with a machete going to town, what do I do? Like, well, I'll activate, emergency services, and all head that way. But our staff is not, especially the younger ones, going to walk up to a guy with a machete wildly swinging at things and be like, excuse me, put that down.
You're not supposed to be doing that.
While you're here,
Caitlin,
pick up
did
all
you
that
have
trash.
something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if that's a crime that's occurring,
Yes.
the police department's responding, I assume.
They are.
So,
There are a lot of times when they see us activate it, especially if they see me, they hightail it. Case in point, I could go to Veterans Park bathroom right now, and if there's anything suspicious going on, the moment I open that door and they see me, it's cockroaches and the like. It's grab everything and go in every different direction. So by the time I call Chief Harvey and his department, and we have that 5 to 7 minute response, we're all of a sudden looking in every different direction and then catching them in the crime. I've done it before with that individual with the machete. There's a machete guy and a sickle guy, and I've probably spent, I don't know how much money of the taxpayers' dollars replacing all the picnic tables that we've chopped up. You know, the trees hopefully heal, and we, do what we can to mend them,
But, one thing I don't want to do is paint all of our parks with this dirty brush. We take a great deal of pride in what we do, and we take a great deal of pride in all of our parks. But, there are definitely some problem areas that need to be addressed. And it's hard on us to see what's happening. You do your best and work hard to make improvements and, for people to enjoy, and then have to sit and watch this type of activity.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why in this presentation tonight, we wanted to talk about what some of the concerns were, but we also wanted to kind of look at the bigger picture of this can actually help enhance the experience of somebody actually going to the park. And just like, whether it's a national park museum that has exhibits, or whether it's a national forest that has a park ranger that helps with trail interpretation, there is both a positive and a benefit, as well as an ability to address concerns. And I don't want us to lose sight of that, because our parks do a great job, and a lot of them, we never have any complaints at all from. Doesn't mean that, there may not be an issue there, but I don't want this to get painted as we're out of control and we need something to address that.
True.
There are definitely some issues there, but this is a way that city staff has looked at. We can address some issues or concerns within the department that are clearly coming to the surface and generating citizen complaints to the city, but it also can be something that can help develop and further enhance our parks to improve the experience of people that are going to be visiting them. These are some of the stats that we kind of talked about. I have specifics as far as those total numbers of calls that I can share with you, but I think that's really something that, as we're getting into the nuts and bolts, this year we responded to around 1,100 complaints year to date. Last year, it was right around 820 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that, we can break those down, but I didn't want to put it all up here. The ones that are concerning are the ones that are most common. Suspicious activity was probably the absolute most common. The others were welfare checks, meaning somebody's passed out inside a park. They're not sure what's going on with them. Maybe they've had too much to drink. Maybe they're having a medical episode. But nevertheless, that generates a call for service. And so part of this is not everything is going to be enforcement with this program. Some of it's going to be positive community outreach. It might be preparing for special events, or helping the Parks Department kind of get fencing together. It could be a number of other things, or it could be something as simple as checking on somebody that's in the park that doesn't need enforcement. So I want to make that, because that's an important distinction. Not everything is going to result in a criminal offense. And the majority of these calls that we have, the biggest two portions are somebody's doing something that looks weird to someone else, or somebody looks like they need help. Those are the biggest calls that we get. So there was some discussion about reserve certification with post, or full-time or full certification with post as kind of a precursor. One of the reasons why that's absolutely a direction we can go to be fully post-certified. One of the problems with that is the lead time to get somebody into that position and the training that is required to maintain that. What would be a perfect fit would be a reserve post certification, except by state law, and I had some conversations with the director of the post board, by statute they cannot be compensated and it has to be volunteer. clearly, that's not what we're looking for in this realm. And we could ask the post board for a waiver of that. There are some programs we're going to talk about here in a few minutes that they do something a little outside. One of the things that was mentioned by the post director was that it is an open carry state. And so that might be a possibility. And the thing I want council to consider with this is that the only restrictions that post actually exerts over a certification is a full post certification. Reserve post certification, even though it says it's got to be 253 hours, the regulations actually say the chief of police, sheriff, appointing authority is the one who determines what they have to go through. But they have to be trained in every area that they're going to be authorized to do something in. So whether it's legal, driving, arrest control, firearms, they have to have that training. And so that's really where that 253 hours comes into play. But the chief of police or sheriff or director has the ability to say, this is what that needs to be. There's also something in our city ordinance that would allow, and it's current in chapter 5.32 and the subsections that are in there, that we currently license security officers as part of our licensing procedure with the city. It's very similar to the reserve post certification in that the chief of police says, hey, they've met all the certification or training that they need in this particular area. They cannot be armed unless they have completed sufficient training, again, as determined by the chief of police. And then that written recommendation then goes to the city clerk, who then issues the license for a security company to actually operate inside the city. So there are some other things that we could do here that would allow us some freedom to be able to say, okay, this is how we want to structure this program. And much like code enforcement doesn't go through a post-certification, we do have them go through their professional organization certification for code enforcement because it's a specialized niche, but they have the authority under ordinance to be able to issue citations. They don't make physical arrests. Some of them do carry tasers, some of them do carry pepper spray. Some of that's for dogs, some of that's also for people that might physically attack them from a defensive standpoint. So quite honestly, council has a lot of ability to be able to say what direction we want to go with this. But I don't think, as previously was brought up, and that's my fault because I needed to do more research before we discussed that reserve post certification is going to be appropriate in this instance because we obviously want to compensate our folks and we don't want it to be volunteer. It's still an option that we could do that, but I think that's more appropriate for somebody who is in Stirrup Ranch, 58,000 acres. The sheriff's department, they're pretty far out, but they're having issues out there, and the sheriff's department could either deputize that guy or girl or give them reserve post certification and allow them, as long as they're in contact and supervision of the sheriff's office, to be able to act in certain instances. I think that's what that's really more appropriate for rather than what we're looking for here. Any questions yet? Okay. So here's some different examples of park ranger programs around the state. When I started talking with other agency heads and the post board, these are some of the ones that were mentioned. Grand Junction has folks, they are not armed, they are not post-certified. They do issue citations and summonses, but whenever a physical arrest or something is required that requires more than just a written piece of paper and an appearance in court, they generally call a police officer. Their function, whether it's on a bike or an ATV or just on foot, they do the same thing. They patrol the parks, very similar to what we've already kind of talked about, helping with if somebody is supposed to have a permit and doesn't, that they actually do that, complying with other codes and regulations. If there's a burn ban that's on and somebody has a campfire, they would obviously have them put it out. Doesn't necessarily mean it would automatically go to a citation or a summons, but it could. And if they run across something that requires a law enforcement officer to investigate and actually take a physical arrest of an individual, then they would summon a Grand Junction police officer to come to the scene. And actually, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, before I go much further, I know we have some folks in the audience that may want to speak to Rudd Park, and we had already kind of addressed that a little bit, but If Mr. Welsh is so inclined and ready to speak, would this be a good time for him to come talk
Absolutely,
about
let's
Red
have some
Park?
public comment.
Red Canyon Park.
Come on up, Superintendent Welsh.
I was just starting to text my wife that maybe I won't pick up Sonic tonight.
How about us? Go on.
Hey, if you get out of here before 8, go do it because it supports the Shop with a Tiger program tonight. That was the goal. If you don't mind, first, a thank you. Never worked in an organization, in a community before in which the entities collaborate so well. To have the support of city government, to have the support of the police department, to have the support of the business community as we have in this city is just amazing. And the things we're accomplishing are incredible because of that. And my sitting in the audience and having my narrow view of what this issue is just got expanded greatly by the depth with which you guys have been covering this topic. And I have full confidence good solutions can come about, because one thing we know about this community is it's those outdoor experiences that people can have are what are attracting people here, and that includes, the next person that's going to open up the next business at TechStart or some organization like that. So I hope I serve more than anything as a voice from the community that feels like there's value in studying this program, this issue, this problem deeply, and coming up with workable solutions. I'd value that very much. So I'm going to focus really on the whole Rudd Park issue, and I may be saying things that people know, but I don't want to assume that. But I'm just going to go back to, I'm 4.5 years into my role as superintendent of schools here, and something that really struck me as interesting when I first got here was this sort of understanding and acceptance that a lot of crazy stuff goes on at Rudd Park all throughout the day and night, and nobody feeling like we needed to do something about it. And as I grew in my understanding that because of really capacity at our high school in the food service program, that we really have to open the doors and let kids go out to lunch every day. And the fact that if you, depending on where you live, you might walk right by Rudd Park to go to Washington Elementary, you might walk right by Rudd Park to go to Canyon City Middle School, and then several times a day you might walk right by or through Rudd Park to get to and from Canyon City High School. That became an issue, and I'd actually like to offer kudos to the police chief that upon his arrival and in working with SRO Canada at the time, we had some discussions about the concerns, and SRO Canada quite frankly, I think made it his life's mission to do something about it. And it was really struck up by the ordinance that was passed about smoking in Rudd, I assume Canyon City Parks at the time. And even one of our strategies was, it was like supposed to be by some certain structures, and we actually donated a structure to Rudd Park to make sure that it really covered the whole park. And we gladly, happily use it for tennis facilities, after school programs, and we would really like for kids when the weather's nice to be able to go over there and eat a sack lunch, or to run over to Dairy Queen and bring their lunch over there. But what we also noticed at the time was, young parents wouldn't want to bring their kids there because of all stuff going on. So I feel like we kind of did some good work over the last couple of years to get an edge on it, but what has happened this year, the experience from the school district has been, I'm the hearing officer for expulsions. I've held 6 expulsion hearings that are directly related to drug activity in Rudd Park, and feel very confident telling you that at least 20 discipline incidents related to drugs in the possession of Canyon City High School students are directly related to some action at Rudd Park. And I'm not here to blame anyone for anything, but what I am noticing is we have two outstanding school resource officers, Officer Coffin and Officer Belding right now. I can't speak highly enough about them. The work that the police department has done to share those folks with us, and you know that financially we have skin in the game on that as well. We share equally with the police department on those officers, but they're spending far too much time off our campuses trying to address that. And I don't, you know, in this modern world we live in where things can happen on school campuses, the last thing I would want to happen would be that, God forbid, that incident occurs and, you know, Officer Belding is just trying to chase some kids, you know, off of the park benches at Rudd Park because they're dealing substances to kids who are walking through. And if I can do nothing else tonight except be a voice from the community. I have the weight of 5 school board members behind this request, and we put something in writing to you that we are concerned about it. No, it's not out of control. I have a daughter who goes to Canyon City High School. I feel like she's absolutely safe, but I'm afraid it could spin out of control, and we're not asking you guys to take full responsibility for it. We're willing to be an equal partner in whatever the solution can be, and so we're all ears as far as any ideas you have. I did in the letter offer one example. I don't know the legalities, but we had when we were able to crack down on Rudd Park a few years back, all the illicit activity moved over to what is affectionately known as the slabs, where kids play basketball behind Make-A-Bone pool. And so then we found out that that property was owned by the Parks and Recreation Department, and we contacted them, and we were able to strike up an MOU that said, during school hours, it's yours. You patrol it as if it's school grounds, and you can ask people to leave. And a bit of an elephant in the room about this whole thing is these are generally school-age kids. And they're not generally Canyon City High School students. We have some online programs in the community you know, that in many ways do very effective things for kids and meet their needs. But in some instances, they serve as a means by which a troubled person, youth, in trouble with the courts typically, who is being ordered to go to school, is able to enroll in school and meet sort of this court definition of I'm going to school. But then they can spend the better part of their day, for lack of a better term, loitering in a public park, keeping young families from feeling comfortable to bring their kids there to play on the equipment, and then pushing influences on kids who are going to the brick and mortar high school in the community. That's Canyon City High School, and that's what we profess to be. So that's part of the problem. That's part of the conundrum, and as you guys know me, I hope, is I'm not a complainer. I'm all in on solutions, and so I encourage you to keep looking at this problem, and as much as you want to involve us in the solution, please do. And already, as you guys were describing some of the issues on the outlying parks and the need for cleanup and stuff, you know, at a drop of the hat, when we needed to clean up downtown last year for the small business revolution thing, who showed up in the greatest numbers? It was Canyon City High School kids, and I guarantee there's a great community service project or 2 or 10 ready to be completed on some of those issues you're dealing with as well. So don't forget us on that. So be happy to answer any questions, but more than that, I just wanted you to, you know, verbally hear the message from the Board of Education.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. We're really glad to have you here as a partner, and also to create awareness. I wasn't aware of the continued problems that were happening at Rudd. Councilman Hamrick?
Thank you. Do I understand from what you said that our problem is not necessarily one of identification of what we might call bad actors. It's not necessarily one of identification or outside influences, but because of legal situations, we have kids that are in high school that don't want to be there and are not necessarily looking at currying anybody's favor. Would that be fair to say that it's not an issue of identification?
My best effort to answer that would be that that's part of the issue. You know, it's not all. When we talk to our school resource officers who are doing a lot of work trying to address this thing, and have to meet a very high standard with the district attorney's office to actually, you know, get something done legally, as we fully understand, is they believe there are some outside influences who are trying to, who have found the right audience in Canyon City, who are very intelligent young men and women, intelligent enough to do their best to stay, to get from getting caught, to, you know, to stay out of the trouble, but are in that process engaging some less savvy kids in some of that activity that results in them being in front of me at an expulsion hearing. Mr. Hamrick, it's not really a simple answer. It's a lot in play. So what I hear being said from the desk right here is there's a lot of ins and outs about how well such a program as this Park Ranger program would work. Here's what I can relate that to. In public schools, hallways are safer when teachers are standing outside their doors during passing periods. Drugs don't get passed, fights don't happen, you know. None of that stuff happens when you can just get your teachers to stand outside their doors from bell to bell. You know, a watched kid is a better kid. And my opinion is a watched public, you know, and I like the attitude being presented that a serviced public, that hey, if you needed help or something like that, if there was an emergency or whatever and there was an immediate response, could be better for us all as well. Big task, but I think there's something to that. We have a lot fewer problems when we're out in the hallways.
That's a great analogy. Council Member Turner?
George, I wonder, you know, when I went to high school, we didn't have an open campus over lunch. And I don't know how long Canyon has had an open campus, but do you think that's part of the problem? Or, I don't know, it just made me think about it.
Yeah, boy. I was superintendent of schools in a little town called Center in the San Luis Valley for 18 years, 19 years total there. And I remember my first day as principal, the kids were asking, can I go over to the convenience store to get something to eat? And I was letting them go. And then the superintendent said, hey, you know, we got a closed campus. No one told me that. I was principal. And we had a closed campus, and that was a good thing, I felt like, for that school, that community. Part of our issue, and I don't know, does anyone here know if our campus was ever closed and when it became open? Yeah.
It was open in 1979.
What'd you say, Rick?
I said it was open in 1979.
Okay, yeah. And I do think a big part of it is capacity. We've had, for example, we've been on lockdown over lunch, and we can't feed 1,000, 1,100 kids, you know. And then I think there's also a little bit of a public relations deal there. You know, folks like Sonic, where I'm going to go after I leave the podium to get my family dinner if they haven't rebelled yet. You know, Dairy Queen, Wendy's, Taco Bell, all those places that good for their business that kids are able to go there as well. And so that's a partnership. If we shut it down, would it probably be safer? Yeah, I bet it would.
Yeah, I mean, that's where my mind goes, is what's the safest thing for our kids? And
yeah.
Yeah.
But that would be a capacity issue for the cafeteria, or we'd have to do it in shifts, you know. There would
Bring
be,
Sonic to the high school.
What's that?
Bring Sonic to the high school during lunch hour.
You know,
Yeah.
We need
yeah,
more
but
food
once
trucks
again,
in
is
town.
where they would eat
Of
is
course.
part of the issue. The capacity in that cafeteria is, you know, like 300.
Sure.
And that's 4 shifts to get everyone through there.
Councilmember Meisner has a.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have
Oh, do you still have more? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Meisner, you can wait for me this time.
And I don't mind that.
Well, my other question's for Derek. It sounds like, I mean, lunchtime from what I'm hearing is kind of the high-risk time for things to be happening in Rudd Park. I mean, is it possible that we could just have increased patrol in Rudd Park during those times? Because I know Officer Belding, you know, like Mr. Walsh is telling us, his presence is needed on campus.
We can. The problem with that is it pulls, and just before we got here, the suspicious people that they were talking about up on Skyline Drive, we tried to get patrol to go up there and check on those individuals. The problem is that the patrol officers who were on duty were actually responding to an individual who had threatened to commit suicide with a gun, and we're trying to find them. So we either need more bodies somewhere, or we need more bodies in patrol, because the call volume is not changing. And I can't really explain why we have a greater call volume or more serious calls than we have had in the past. But it's not as simple as just saying patrol needs to be there, because we've tried to do that. Canada did a great job, and I appreciate Superintendent Welsh giving us some accolades there, but they deserve just as much, because the way that we were a force multiplier to make that big change last year was Jeff was kind of the spearhead. He was the visible person, but Bill Summers was out there just as much, and so were some of the other folks in the high school, and that's really what helped make a huge difference last year. We've made arrests this year already in Rudd Park, a lot of arrests for substance abuse, more so than previously. That's not having the impact, and so it really is more about kind of that force multiplier, and that's what I see Parks Department as, because this would also be that same type of partnership. The park rangers might be the visible spearhead, so to speak, but the Parks Department could help be that force multiplier to address some of those individuals, because there's many days that Ryan Belding is out there, and there's just as many kids out there, and it's just too much. So
What about the suggestion of having an MOU with the Canyon City Schools, so some of their employees do have some authority before, during, and after school to patrol the property and have the authority to tell the individuals that they need to leave?
I think it takes a village, and just like with the Parks Department having some authority, park rangers having some very specific direction, I would agree that that will help, absolutely, because there's no way that with the city's budget, we're going to be able to have a 15-person parks department, or a park ranger department, I'm sorry, that's going to address all of these different individuals. And so if we can empower other groups like we did, who are just as passionate about making changes in these areas, the Parks Department, the school district, I think we've got to look at that. This is, like I said, this is not the panacea that's going to fix that. This is a step in the right direction to be more visible and create momentum around that behavioral change.
Well, my concern too is we're kind of talking about the conceptual idea of a park ranger program, so we know this isn't going to be something that is going to help us in the short term, but we have a problem now and a safety risk for our students in that area. So, I'd like us to be thinking short-term solutions as well, so that we're not waiting on something that, perhaps we may not have the funding for, frankly. And, we've already considered our budget for next year, so it is kind of a lot of uncertainty in this, with this program.
Superintendent, did you have a comment?
So just I don't want to give credence to that it's only a lunch problem. It's not. It's if you observe the traffic in and out of Rudd Park, a lot goes on when it's not lunch. And actually, maybe I would almost contend that lunch is a little bit of less of a problem, because we do get out there in force. We have our principal gets out there, our discipline coordinator gets out there, some of our security folks. We have an amazing staff trying to keep that school safe, and there's a lot of people out there. And I don't know about the legalities and how comfortable you would be. The slabs are not an issue. they are not an issue anymore, because we send Troy over there, and anyone who he doesn't see coming through the door every day who's out there, he asks them for an ID. If they don't have an ID, he asks them to leave. And what we would certainly not do would be turn, a young mother and father taking their 3-year-old kid to play on the swings. We would never turn that person away, but a school-age kid who maybe who doesn't have a Canyon City High School ID, we might say, why don't you go hang out at a different park? If you want to come to Canyon City High School, here's how you enroll, and we'll take you and we'll educate you. So having some power to do something like that could be an immediate thing to do, and we would be happy to put as much effort out there patrolling that area as we do the slabs, if that were the case.
We've met before with you and the online schools and Chief Harvey. Do you see value in maybe meeting again and talking about these issues and maybe working on that MOU?
I do, and I know some of the conversations turn towards having an SRO specifically for those 2 schools, and I'm not really sure why the political will from those 2 schools dissipated, but I definitely see value in having a conversation.
Okay. So I think we should proceed with that for sure. And whatever else we can do to just support the schools and the safety of our kids. Councilmember Turner, did you have some more comments to make? Okay, and then Meisner then.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, George. Well, from my perspective, I do apologize because I thought the Rudd problem as we knew it before had been kind of taken care of, but apparently we addressed it, but there's still some significant issue there. Relative to that and the impact on the community, in terms of all the other park problems, I would put Rudd Park at the top of the list in terms of my priorities as a council person, and in top of the top of the list in terms of funding to fix that problem or to try to address that problem. I mean, are surveillance cameras any value? I don't need an answer, but we need to look at a variety of ways of helping to monitor and identify and move some of that unnecessary evil crowds to another direction. I think if you're talking about an MOU, I think we need to at least first communicate with the attorney and make for sure that it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, actually, I may have some information on the camera issue. I did talk with Sean Cole here the other day, and this subject came up of cameras in the school, cameras pointed away from the school, and the particular issue is there is a camera on a corner of the new building. It is a pan tilt zoom camera. The issue is that there's lots of trees in Rudd Park, and there's a lot of the activity is not exactly right out there along curbside, along College. And so if you've got stuff going on in the back, cameras may not be there may be a camera or 2 that might, help, but there are some problems, some roadblocks that would prevent a really good use of technology there.
If you can find a way to mount a camera or several cameras in Rudd Park and tie it into our system, we would be happy to support the community with that.
It would seem to me like that, given the seriousness of the problem, with all due respect, not necessarily to the school district, but to our community and to those vulnerable young people, it changes my mind in terms of priority. And if surveillance is one option, not to solve the problem, but as a tool, then I think we need to give it some serious consideration. There's got to be tons of options out there for wireless cameras that can communicate with anybody in terms of helping to identify some suspicious parties. But if that's still a problem, it changes my priorities in terms of where some resources need to be allocated in terms of trying to address the problem.
Chief Harvey, when I did a ride-along with the co-responders, Detective Van Dyke had mentioned where he worked previously, they did use surveillance cameras in the parks, and that he found it very effective and helpful. Do you see that that could be a possibility to implement?
I do, and, you know, just looking at the library and the museum, the library has a lot more cameras. It increases their situational awareness about what's happening not only there, but in Macon Plaza. The museum does not. So, you know, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I think a more comprehensive approach is absolutely warranted in this circumstance. But I also believe that a park ranger program is, again, kind of the tip of the spear, because it helps us codify and understand better exactly what we're seeing from an enforcement standpoint. And, you know, like everything we do in the police department anyway, we try and be as comprehensive and bring in those other groups, those other stakeholders to help us fix those. Look at technology, look at ways to become more effective and be in other places. But I also don't want to lose sight of the whole reason why we're here tonight is to talk about kind of that first initial step of momentum, because, you know, talking about infrastructure, unless they're wireless cameras, there's going to be a time period to have to bury cable lines and actually, you know, put those, the infrastructure in place to be able to do that. So that is absolutely steps that we need to take. But as far as immediacy, the most immediate solution really is to have somebody specifically focused on the issues we're seeing, like those in Rudd Park, Red Canyon, Skyline Drive.
Right, and as you said, today's particularly about the park ranger, and it is going to be kind of fluid as we determine it, but it's part of the, you plan it, you do it, then you study how it goes, and then we plan some more to accommodate, so.
And I don't, apparently, the Rudd Park issue, I don't see the ranger program as helping us a whole lot with the Rudd Park issue, the immediate problem. And I'm just telling you, I'll try not to get emotional, but if everybody in this room that has a high school student lost one of their children in the park to an overdose, we would take care of that problem. But nobody in this room is losing a child to that. So for the most part, it's low priority. But it's going to happen if we don't try to address it.
Councilmember Meisner, my daughter goes to that same high school.
I realize that.
So, you know, I'm as equally invested as many people in this room to find solutions for that. And I do believe, otherwise I wouldn't be reporting this to you, that a park ranger program can assist with those things. It's not that we don't have presence, we do. It takes more presence. And so just like with the slabs, we need to be looking at alternative solutions to be able to fix those issues. But we also have to take steps towards identifying it's not just a Rudd Park issue. There are issues in Vets Park that are equally as concerning for people. We had a library employee who went to go eat his lunch in Vets Park. And while he was there was a fight breaking out between some individuals who started to pay attention to him instead of each other and actually pulled a knife on the library employee. So, you know, all life is equally important, and I hear exactly what you're saying, and I have a vested interest to make sure my daughter and everyone else in this room's child who attends high school in Canyon City is safe. But I think we also have to do it from a balanced approach to say we need one step at a time, and this is an immediate step that we could take. We can look at ways to shuffle existing staff, to leverage other opportunities that are already in the budget to be able to say, how can we get more people around this subject rather than less?
So, and I think we'll probably have plan some future meetings to determine what that more will be in collaboration with the schools, but we probably need to move on through the program. Are we comfortable with that? Moving on to the next
I'm
step?
not. I'm comfortable with your last statement of whatever terminology you utilize to indicate that we need to look at what resources are available to have some immediate impact. Whatever that is, I think that issue needs to go to the top of priorities, and we can allocate whatever we can afford at this particular point in time. We're limited with resources, but we've identified a problem that we all realize exists, and if we don't do something starting tomorrow, I think it's crazy. I'm done.
All right, well, I would invite Jim Meisner to participate in those discussions if he
I don't need to,
wishes
just get something done.
Please. Okay,
It's simple.
but I'm happy to participate in them as well.
Yeah, I'll help, but
if needed. But we would appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We obviously care considerably about our youth.
I have no
kids.
doubt
Yeah.
you do, and I thank you all for
Thanks,
taking the
George.
time to listen.
Yeah, and that was a long legacy at Red Park, and it's going to take some work to
You speak of
to
Sean,
change
he
the
calls
culture.
himself a former Rudd Park Ranger, and apparently that has a meeting. John, you're laughing.
So we will get on that, and I think, Chief, you've got the message on it as well, and we'll set up a meeting with the schools. Is there any other comments from the public that anyone would like to make? Okay, then let's go ahead and start wrapping it up.
Okay, so Larimer County Rangers, basically, they take individuals who are already deputized, they're fully post-certified, they have to have a 2-year degree, and essentially, they are more focused on environmental crimes and things that are actually occurring in the park, but they are not a stepping stone to a full post-certification. They are simply additional police officers, if you will, that are tasked with specific enforcement in park regions. Fort Collins is probably the most applicable for kind of what we're talking about here. They do medical first response, wildland firefighters, search and rescue, ice and swift water rescue. They do site management activities along with Parks Department in Fort Collins. And they investigate crimes at the request of local police. So they are able to do some follow-up investigations, but they, again, don't do physical arrests of individuals. They are armed and are not post-certified. So kind of looking at our proposed outline, I took the parts of those 3 programs that I think will help us most here and brought those things in that I've heard from the Parks Department, that we have gotten from the community that actually are concerns, and tried to put them into this general statement of overview that covers the job description that was previously presented, and then also kind of sets the objectives of what the program would actually attain. So they would patrol both city parks, open space, city-owned recreation sites, trails, recreation facilities, recreation buildings, so it'd be different than City Hall, specifically to those things that are in the park, by motorized vehicle, bicycle, or on foot. We have ATVs that would actually be purposed for that. Would protect and preserve natural, historic, and cultural features inside of those facilities and areas, be able to provide a medical response, help obviously detect issues that could lead to wildland fire concerns or should a fire actually begin, report and investigate damage to city facilities or city-owned areas, and actually investigate those and follow through with summonses. But the vision for that would be is they would not do physical arrests. They would do summonses very similar to and levy charges against individuals through municipal court, very much the same way that code enforcement officers do, but should a physical arrest be needed, they would actually summon a fully post-certified officer. They would be armed, and ideally, at least from what I think we can accomplish or what would be the best fit, they'd be licensed as security through the Canyon City ordinance that I talked about earlier. And we would require them to complete a training regiment that mirrors the standards we require police officers who would function in those areas to do. So being able to carry a firearm, they would have to meet the same qualification requirements and training requirements, both initially and continued education, as what our current officers do.
From a budgetary standpoint, what we're looking at is we've currently budgeted 39 post-certified officers. Our current staffing level is 35, is that correct, Chief? Mm-hmm. So what we would be looking at would be actually taking 2 of those post-certified positions to create this park ranger position. And again, part of that is to be able to ramp up a little bit quicker and have those response, have that presence and response available within the parks.
Councilmember Meisner?
So how many 2 post equals how many rangers?
It would be 1 for 1. So 2 posts equals 2 rangers.
So I guess this is where we get back to the conversation we had the other day, that you weren't here because you were out in your skinny dipping.
Whoa.
Well, theoretically.
Hopefully not.
I mean, if the cost is the same, why not have those people post-certified?
For two reasons. One, to actually get somebody who's post-certified, we're having difficulty with that obviously right now because our background process that's required through post is pretty intense. We, at one point, had one applicant for every vacancy that we had at the time. Several of those folks could not pass the background or requirements when we actually started looking into their backgrounds and sending them to psychological testing and polygraph testing that they weren't able to pass it. It is a lot easier, and code enforcement's a good example of that. Code enforcement's fully staffed. There are a lot of folks who are exemplary people in the community that want to help and fulfill that role, but it takes 8 months just to get through the training, 90 days, assuming everything goes well, to get through the background process. So we're looking at roughly 11 to 12 months to actually get an individual in that position should we home grow them. We've talked about the issues with recruiting and keeping people from other agencies because of the amount of money that they pay. And so hiring somebody who's already certified, I need them answering those 911 calls, helping look for people who, are armed and want to harm themselves. And this is a good stepping stone that helps us find those individuals, gets them some initial training. It gets them up and running a lot faster and gets somebody on the project now as opposed to having that 11-month turnaround time frame to actually get them in the position.
I'll buy that because of the level of trust that I've got in you, but I got to say something, that whole process doesn't make sense. I mean,
So, which
I
part?
mean,
'Cause I
well,
can
we've got a
explain
post
that.
individual that we're paying X dollars. We've got a non-post individual that we're paying X dollars. Somewhere around in that whole process, the mix, it seems like something
And-
isn't going to work.
And Councilman Meisner, that might be, my fault there. We're saying it's going to be 1-for-1 for, the positions, but the pay is not going to be.
Oh, okay,
Oh, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right, well, that maybe makes,
There's cost savings there.
yeah, that maybe makes some sense, but I just got to, I mean, in terms of the whole program, if you believe this is going to provide some kind of a solution, not to the Rudd Park issue, but overall, then that's what we hired you for. We need to get something going and
Okay,
try to-
Council Member Cochran has some comments.
Okay.
I personally would be opposed to eliminating 2 post-certified positions to make this happen. I feel like that's robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've heard all night that the police department is short-staffed and needs all the help they can get. So I personally am in favor of this park ranger program. I am not in favor of eliminating 2 post-certified positions to get there. The funding would need to come from somewhere else.
Chief Harvey, if you could get all of those post-certified positions full, could you? Or is this an opportunity where we could still alleviate some of those gaps by having the park rangers in there?
So in a perfect world, I absolutely do not want to give up my certified positions. And Mr. Stevens and I have talked about that. But we do recognize it as an issue for the community as well as the Parks Department. And so in trying to be creative, that's the solution that we came up with. Ideally, it's just like property investigators. We have 2 property and narcotics investigators within the department that are not filled at this point because the already certified officers to move into those positions, I don't have replacements for them to answer 911 calls on the street. So to make it a further specialization is difficult. So that's part of the reason for not another reason for not having it as fully post-certified just as a specialty assignment within the department. But it is easier to hire folks who are not certified, who can fulfill the role and have the character traits I'm looking for in that position. In the long run, best case scenario would be is we keep the 39 and add park rangers, but to get something moving in that momentum direction, because I don't have enough people to patrol the parks and to do those things currently. This gets me 2 bodies that are actually going to be present and visible in those areas. But in the long term, I would absolutely, and I appreciate Councilwoman Cochran's comments that she's right. I mean, I need the positions I have, but I also want to get some people quickly into those positions that can help alleviate some of the community concerns.
So that's something we need to look at in 2020.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of it is, you know, you have these park rangers who are in the parks, they're the boots on the ground. They can triage a situation to see if a post-certified officer actually needs to be there or not. They can handle the more minor offenses, and that way it's a less of a resource drain on the police departments, where they can be focused more on patrol or other serious issues.
Councilmember Turner.
Councilmember Meisner asked the question that I was going to ask, so I'm good, yeah. He beat me to it.
Oh.
So that puts me up.
So Councilmember Meisner still has something to say.
Well, I think one of the things that I see, that saw, since in my 4 years, is reality is whatever your numbers are in the police department in terms of budget, you're probably never going to achieve that and maintain it. So that gives us the flexibility to take some of that budgeted money and use it for a similar purpose. If we were to get to a point of being able to fully staff the police department at the budgeted numbers, then I think we come back and change the budget to add for the Rangers. But I see some unused money for budgeted positions because we can never fill those. We've only had it at capacity, I think, one time for a very short period of time since you've been here. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Couple of weeks.
Yep.
Other than that, we just can't keep a full staff of police officers, but it's been budgeted, and what we're just saying is let's take that money, use it for a ranger.
Yep.
And I'm the first one that if we can staff at 39, I think this council's going to say you staff at 39 and add for the rangers.
And hopefully those rangers could potentially become excellent candidates for a post-certified position.
That is the hope.
Yep.
Councilmember Hamrick.
Well, gee whiz, you just stole my thunder. But I was just going to make, ask the rhetorical question. Really, maybe the way to look at this is that the park rangers are the junior police league or something like that, where they're the transition guys that hopefully someday, and gals, that can move on to the force. But if they don't, there's a need right now, right there for them. But it could be a transition force to help us get to where we want to be, essentially.
And honestly, that was definitely part of the design, is to help us identify and get people in the department. They're a known quantity at that point, and we're doing that with code enforcement right now, too. One of our young ladies who's in code enforcement is actually slated for, and I appreciate the council's support for budgeting actual dollars to send to an academy. She's going to be starting the Pikes Peak Community College in January. So it absolutely is, and I don't want to diminish their contribution, but a farm league for police officers. And yes, hopefully we can, just like the Explorer program, funnel people into the department so we are fully staffed in the long run.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of really good ground. Are there any more questions from council? I have the sense that we want to move forward and address these issues.
And my only point, I don't want to hammer this, but with the RUD issue, is I'm just saying that if we were to have a directive tomorrow morning, that if you're within 5 blocks of RUD, you do a drive-by on RUD as standard procedure. That type of simple process that's going to have a minimal impact on operations, but have somewhat of an impact in terms of presence. I think there's lots of things that we can do to increase that presence that would maybe make a difference.
Well, whether it's that or something else, Councilman Meisner, you have my word, we will absolutely look at that. And the issues are not as bad as they were last year. Let me be clear. They are still a lot better in Rudd Park. Some of the conversations that we've had at the school district, we meet the first Tuesday of every month with the school district. I personally go unless I'm drawn somewhere else, unfortunately. And we have had conversations about that and follow-up. So it's not as bad as it was. We do have a couple of people calling. There are some things that are happening there, but you have my word, we will absolutely get it back in check.
And if I may, Jesse and I were just talking about Rudd Park today in particular. And we decided, or we were informed by the people that are actually doing the work there, that Rudd Park has not been as bad as it has been in years past this year. And that's, goes with graffiti, littering, vandalism, and that type of thing. So Rudd Park is better than it has been. But there still may be issues, absolutely.
I just think Rudd Park, because of its proximity to the school,
Absolutely.
is a different problem and a different priority. I realize we've got all these other issues with the public and what have you, but that's not our future. Our future is over at that high school. And Rudd Park, in my mind, is different.
So I appreciate your word on addressing that, Chief, and I think Interim Administrator Stevens, we can make some arrangements with the school, and together we can make that happen. But I do think it is important to make sure that we don't paint that brush of doom and gloom for our parks, because they really are incredible. I know your staff works so hard day in and day out to keep it clean, keep it safe, and they are pristine, they're beautiful, and we love using those parks, both within the city and in the mountain parks. And we really appreciate all that you do to make it the best that it can be.
We enjoy doing it, and we would ask council to pass an ordinance to remove all the Canadian geese from the park, if you would be so kind. And one other thing tomorrow, don't forget, is the tree lighting at 6 o'clock at Depot Park. So
Tree
hope
lighting
hope
tomorrow,
to see
6 o'clock. It's going to be awesome with snowball fights and
Snowball
hot
fight,
chocolate
Yes,
and
'cause
s'mores.
that's legal now.
It
Yes.
is legal.
And we still have 5 minutes if you want to make a run to Sonic to support Canyon City High School in their fundraising. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for all that you do and for the audience that was here as well. Thanks.
Thank you.